The evening heat clung thick to the city streets, making the air shimmer under the flickering lights of worn traffic signals. Dana Moore kept her windows down, letting the late summer breeze roll through the cabin of her dark gray SUV. She wasn't the type to blast music or let her phone distract her while driving. Discipline was muscle memory, something ingrained after years of operating in volatile territories where 1 second of inattention could cost lives. But tonight she was off duty, dressed in plain clothes, her hair pulled back in a low, effortless bun, and on her way to visit her goddaughter for her 10th birthday. It was a simple, ordinary moment. Or it should have been. The flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror changed that. Dana glanced down at her dashboard clock, 9:13 p.m. She slowed, signaling as she pulled over to the shoulder of the empty road, watching through the mirror as the cruiser came to a halt just behind her. She sighed softly, puzzled. She hadn't been speeding. No illegal turns. Nothing out of order. Her hand instinctively hovered near the glove compartment, where her driver's license and registration sat neatly inside a slim leather folder. Years in uniform had taught her to stay still, hands visible, eyes forward. No sudden moves, especially not as a black woman in this America. A white female officer approached, hand already resting on the grip of her sidearm. Her nameplate caught a flash of the street lamp. Officer K. Daniels. Mid-30s, sharp bob haircut, the smug air of someone who never expected consequences. License and registration. Daniels barked, no greeting, no explanation. Dana complied wordlessly, sliding the documents out and handing them through the open window. The officer barely glanced at them. "You know why I pulled you over?" Daniels asked, eyes narrowing. "No, ma'am," Dana replied evenly, keeping her voice low and measured. Daniels smirked, leaning in closer. "Failure to signal a lane change, and you look like you've been drinking tonight." "I haven't, officer," Dana stated. Her pulse remained steady. It was the kind of accusation she'd heard about, seen ruin lives. She felt the tightening coil in her gut, but kept her face unreadable. "Step out of the vehicle." "Is there a reason?" "Now." Dana exhaled through her nose and stepped out, calm and controlled, as Daniels motioned for backup over her radio. Within minutes, another cruiser arrived. A male officer stepped out, though he kept a distance. Daniels, however, seemed to savor the moment, watching Dana with a predator's grin. What came next unfolded like a poorly written script designed to humiliate. Daniels ordered Dana to place her hands on the hood of the car. Without warning, she grabbed Dana's wrist, yanking it up sharply behind her back. "Ow, that's unnecessary," Dana said, wincing but keeping her footing. "You resisting?" Daniels snapped, twisting her wrist further. "I'm not resisting." But Daniels was already turning to the backup officer. "Witness, suspect, tried to push me. Aggressive behavior. She resisted." The other officer hesitated. He looked at Dana, at the obvious control in her posture, the absence of aggression. But then he nodded. "I saw it." Handcuffs bit into Dana's wrists. The metal was familiar, but never like this. Daniels recited a Miranda warning with a mocking tilt to her voice, then shoved Dana into the back of the cruiser. She sat in silence as they drove to the precinct. Her mind was already racing ahead, not with panic, but calculation. They don't know who I am. And that fact was about to cost them more than they could imagine. At the station, paperwork blurred the truth into fiction. Officer Daniels scribbled down statements of resistance, of Dana allegedly lunging at her, of suspected intoxication, though no breathalyzer was ever administered. The male officer signed off as a witness. 2 more officers watched, disinterested, one smirking at the story like it was routine. Dana waited, never breaking composure. By the time they placed her in a holding cell, wordless and isolated, she had already mapped out her response. There would be a hearing in the morning, a quick arraignment, a public defender if she didn't make a call. But the Navy had taught her patience, tactical precision. She wouldn't pull rank yet. not until they buried themselves deeper. Across town, her phone buzzed where it lay in the SUV's console. 3 missed calls from Commander Russell, her direct superior at Naval Special Warfare Command, and a 4th from an old friend at the Pentagon. She was expected at a classified briefing next week, one that would finalize her promotion to captain and her appointment to lead one of the Navy's most elite operational groups, the first black woman to ever command such a unit. And here she was, in a concrete cell, reduced in their eyes to nothing but another disposable black woman in handcuffs. The irony tasted like blood. That night, Officer Daniels bragged in the locker room about how she'd handled a mouthy suspect. She laughed about how easy it was to write up a resisting charge, how no one would question it, how judges always took a cop's word over a civilian's. But Dana wasn't just any civilian. And Officer Daniels had just made the kind of mistake that ends careers, topples precincts, and changes systems. Because tomorrow, the court would see who Dana Moore truly was. And she was coming for them. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that turn pain into power. The courthouse smelled of stale coffee and overworked air conditioning, the kind of place where lives were quietly dismantled between tired murmurs and indifferent glances. Dana Moore sat in a cramped, dimly lit holding room behind the courtroom, dressed in a faded orange jumpsuit they insisted she wear, though her paperwork hadn't even cleared for formal charges yet. It was protocol in cities like this, where procedure bent around prejudice and efficiency trumped justice. She sat on the bench, back straight, wrists resting loosely on her lap. A guard offered her a paper cup of water, eyes flickering with something like discomfort. Dana thanked him quietly. He nodded, then disappeared down the hall. She knew the playbook by heart, the quick arraignment, the default guilty pleas pressured by overworked public defenders, the whispered advice of, just take the deal, because fighting costs too much, time, money, reputation. Especially for someone who looked like her. But Dana Moore didn't plead, she waited. And when they called her name, she rose with the precision of a soldier, walking to the courtroom like a woman who had marched through war zones. Inside, it was predictably sparse. A tired judge with a comb-over, a disinterested prosecutor skimming his phone, and a handful of court officers lingering along the walls. The public defender assigned to her was still rifling through Dana's thin file, already defeated before the first gavel drop. And then there was Officer Catherine Daniels. The cop strolled in with the easy confidence of a woman who believed the system existed to serve her. Blonde hair tied in a tight ponytail, crisp blue uniform adorned with service stripes and a self-satisfied smile. She greeted the prosecutor like an old drinking buddy, shaking hands with one of the court officers who gave her an approving nod. Daniels caught Dana's gaze and smirked. Checkmate, her eyes seemed to say. The judge cleared his throat and the clerk began the formalities. State versus Moore, Dana Elaine. Charges: assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, reckless endangerment. Dana said nothing. Not yet. Officer Daniels, the prosecutor began. Would you please recount for the court what transpired the night of August 22nd? Daniels launched into her script. She told the story like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. The reckless driving, the refusal to obey orders, the moment Dana allegedly shoved her. The violent aggression she was forced to suppress in order to protect herself and her fellow officer. She even dabbed theatrically at her cheek when mentioning a supposed bruise. The judge nodded along. The prosecutor gave sympathetic murmurs, and no one bothered to question a word. Then it was Dana's turn. The public defender, a young woman named Lila who looked about 6 months out of law school, glanced nervously at Dana. We can request a continuance, she whispered. No, Dana murmured, eyes steady on the judge. Let's proceed. Do you wish to make a statement before the court? The judge asked, one brow raised, as though expecting a desperate plea. Dana rose, clasping her hands behind her back. Permission to speak freely, Your Honor? You may. She took a breath. For the record, I deny every accusation made against me. I did not assault Officer Daniels, nor did I resist arrest. I complied with every command. I did not endanger anyone's life. What happened on that roadside last night was not law enforcement. It was a power play built on prejudice. The judge sighed, looking like he'd heard this before. Ms. Moore will address evidence at trial. For now, I am Lieutenant Commander Dana Moore, United States Navy SEAL, Special Operations Command, Clearance Level 9, Service ID 210-453679. The room froze. Daniels visibly paled, her smirk vanishing like smoke. Dana continued, her voice low and exact. I have served this country for 17 years. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 classified operations in hostile territories, and I currently hold command over a special warfare platoon. The Department of Defense has already been notified of my detainment, and I expect JAG officers to arrive within the hour. The judge dropped his pen. The prosecutor's mouth opened, then shut. Furthermore, Dana said, turning her gaze on Daniels, I possess dashcam footage from my vehicle, which automatically uploads to a secure military server. It captures every second of Officer Daniels' conduct, including her falsified statements, and the absence of any aggressive action on my part. Daniels stammered. That's impossible. I wasn't just a civilian you could corner in the dark, officer, Dana said softly, a quiet threat woven beneath the calm. And now you've turned a misdemeanor charge into a federal incident. The sound of polished dress shoes echoed through the back of the courtroom. A tall, broad-shouldered black man in a Navy uniform entered, accompanied by 2 JAG officers. His ribbons gleamed under the harsh lights. Lieutenant Commander Moore, he called, voice firm. Stand down. We're here to extract you. Yes, Commander Russell. Dana faced the judge. Respectfully, Your Honor, I am now under military jurisdiction. The judge fumbled with his glasses. This is highly irregular. I wasn't notified. You will be, Commander Russell replied, handing a packet of classified orders to the bailiff. Effective immediately, this case is under federal review. Officer Daniels will remain for questioning. The courtroom erupted. Daniels protested, claiming she didn't know who Dana was, that it wasn't personal. The prosecutor stammered about jurisdiction. The judge attempted to regain control. But the tide had turned. As Dana walked out, unshackled and flanked by her fellow officers, she didn't look back. Officer Daniels' career wasn't over yet, but it was about to be. And so was the brotherhood of silence that had protected her for years. Tomorrow, the real reckoning would begin. By sunrise the next morning, the city was humming with a different kind of energy. News vans clustered near the courthouse steps like vultures circling a fresh kill. Local anchors rehearsed their on-air lines, their makeup half melted under the already sweltering heat. Rumors had leaked overnight, an officer accused of falsifying charges against a Navy SEAL, and not just any SEAL, but a high-ranking black woman with classified clearance and a record that could shame half the brass in Washington. In a conference room on the top floor of the federal building, Dana Moore sat at the head of a polished oak table. She had exchanged the holding cell jumpsuit for her service khakis, the insignia on her collar gleaming sharply under the sterile overhead lights. Around her sat Commander Russell, 2 JAG attorneys, and Agent Clarice Benton from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, a steely woman with storm gray eyes and a voice that rarely rose above a whisper, because it didn't have to. On the long conference table, a laptop sat open with the dashboard camera footage queued. Dana watched herself on the screen, her calm compliance at every step, the aggression in Daniels' posture, the fabricated narrative written with the ease of someone too practiced in this sort of deception. Russell spoke first. This is worse than we expected. Benton nodded. Daniels has a history, 4 prior complaints in the last 2 years, excessive force, fabricated statements, discrimination, all quietly buried by her precinct's internal affairs office. She's protected but not invincible. Dana's jaw clenched. And the other officers? Complicit, Benton said flatly. But we've flipped one already. Officer Justin Klein. Young, third year on the force. Daniels pressured him into backing her story, but he came clean once we presented the federal charges he'd face. Dana leaned back, arms folded. I want them all in front of a grand jury. You'll get it, Russell assured her. But we need to move carefully. If we're going to dismantle this, it won't be just Daniels. We're looking at systemic rot in that department. She's not acting alone. Dana's phone buzzed on the table. A message from an unknown number flashed. They don't protect us, but I will. Klein. It was small, but it was a start. Benton pushed a manila folder across the table. We also pulled records on Daniels' arrest history. A disturbing pattern. 23 black men and women charged with resisting arrest or assaulting an officer in the past 18 months. 17 cases had no corroborating evidence besides her word. 12 pled guilty under pressure. Dana's stomach turned. She'd seen this before, not in the streets of Kandahar or Fallujah, but here, under the glossy sheen of American justice. A quieter kind of war, one without uniforms, but with casualties all the same. I want those cases reopened, Dana said, her voice a low command. Benton met her gaze. Already in motion. The room fell silent for a beat, the weight of it all pressing down like a storm cloud before the break. Dana took a long breath. Then it's time. They moved fast after that. A joint press conference was scheduled for noon, not to air classified details. Dana's rank, her SEAL status, her operational history would remain restricted. But the world would learn that an active-duty Navy officer, with a decorated record, had been falsely accused and assaulted by an officer of the law sworn to protect and serve, and that the web was wider than anyone wanted to admit. At 11:32 a.m., Officer Daniels' house was raided by Internal Affairs under federal order. Her locker was cleared from the precinct. Cell phones, personal and work-issued, confiscated. Her laptop seized. Evidence logs reviewed and cross-checked. By noon, Daniels sat in an interrogation room of her own, pale, shaking, a shadow of the smug enforcer she'd been 24 hours before. Back at the federal building, Dana waited in a side room while Russell addressed the press. We stand today in unwavering support of Lieutenant Commander Dana Moore, Russell declared, and we vow to pursue justice not only for her but for every citizen whose rights have been trampled by the abuse of power. Questions flew. Reporters shouted. Names were demanded, but Dana didn't need the cameras. Her war wasn't for sound bites. She stared out the window, watching as clouds rolled over the city skyline, a storm on the horizon. Behind her, Benton spoke. We traced some of Daniel's connections. Her brother-in-law is head of the Internal Affairs Division. Explains a lot. Dana's lip curled. Clean house. No exceptions. We will, Benton promised, but you need to be ready. The old guard doesn't go down easy. Dana finally turned, her gaze like cold steel. Neither do I. The room fell silent once more. Tomorrow, they would drop the full investigation publicly. Officers would be indicted. Cases reopened, apologies demanded, and Dana Moore would not return to the shadows, because what Daniels had triggered wasn't just retaliation, it was transformation. And Dana had every intention of finishing what the streets of this city and the blood-soaked alleys of foreign wars had taught her. You didn't survive power by fearing it. You dismantled it, brick by rotten brick. That night, long after the press conference cameras went dark and the precinct's back rooms emptied of federal agents, Dana Moore sat alone on the balcony of her apartment overlooking the city. The skyline glistened with a million lights, everyone a silent witness to the quiet wars people fought, in places no one bothered to see. She knew those wars intimately. Not the kind fought in headlines or congressional hearings, but the ones waged in hushed offices, in traffic stops, in interrogation rooms where power wasn't discussed. It was enforced. Her phone buzzed for the 100th time. Messages from old friends, commanders, senators, Even a terse one-liner from Admiral Hawthorne himself. Handled with precision, as expected. Carry on. Dana took a long breath. Precision. It was what they always demanded. But tonight, it felt heavy. She scrolled through the other messages, a string from Klein. They're threatening my pension. My wife's scared. I did the right thing, didn't I? Another from a woman she didn't know. My brother's case was one of hers. We thought he was guilty. We didn't know. Thank you. Dana closed her eyes against the sharp sting behind them. The temptation to retaliate, to humiliate Daniels in the same ruthless public way she'd done to others, pressed at the edges of her restraint. But she knew better. Retaliation was easy. It was clean, satisfying in its immediacy. Justice was slower, messier, and it left scars you had to carry long after the headlines faded. She didn't want to be another symbol. She wanted to break something bigger. A knock at her door. Commander Russell entered carrying a bottle of whiskey and 2 heavy glasses. The lines in his face were deeper than they'd been that morning. War did that. This one wasn't fought with bullets, but it left damage all the same. Permission to enter, Commander? He asked with a smirk. Dana gestured him in. I don't think we're doing protocol tonight. He poured 2 glasses, handing one to her. You did good, kid. Didn't feel good. Russell grunted. Justice never does. It's a war of attrition. They sat in silence for a long while, the city buzzing below them, the hum of police helicopters still slicing through the air. Russell spoke first. Benton pulled Daniels' financials. There's more. Off-the-books bonuses, cash kickbacks tied to certain arrests. Judges she's cozy with. Civil forfeitures that vanished. It's bigger than her. Dana swallowed the burn of whiskey. I figured. City Council's already in damage control. The DA's office wants a meeting tomorrow. Let them wait. Russell chuckled, shaking his head. You know, they're terrified of you now. Not because you're military, not because of your clearance, because you didn't flinch. I flinch plenty, Dana admitted, her voice soft. I just don't show it. The older man nodded, studying her with something close to pride. We don't get many like you, Moore. Not ones willing to stay clean when it's easier to burn it down. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared out at the skyline. I thought about it, you know. About wrecking her. Making sure every inch of her name was scorched so bad her grandkids would have to change theirs to get a job. I could have done it. Why didn't you? Because Daniels isn't the point. The system that protected her, rewarded her, turned a blind eye to what she was doing. That's the war. Russell raised his glass. Then let's fight it. She clinked her glass to his, the sound sharp in the quiet. Tomorrow, Dana said, I'm sitting down with the families of every person she put in a cage, every name she buried. I'm not just reopening cases, I'm reopening wounds. Russell let out a slow breath. That's gonna be ugly. I know. But you'll do it anyway. Damn right. The next morning would bring subpoenas and resignations, desperate calls from city officials begging for private settlements. They'd offer her advisory positions, media deals, medals. But Dana didn't want their accolades. She wanted restructuring. Independent civilian review boards with subpoena power, federal oversight on abuse of force complaints, mandatory body cam audits by third-party agencies. An end to qualified immunity shields for serial offenders. Real change, the kind they couldn't quietly undo after the cameras left. And she wasn't asking any more. As the night stretched into quiet hours, Russell stood, setting his empty glass on the table. Get some sleep, Commander. Tomorrow's another war. Dana gave a half smile. Aren't they all? She watched him go, then picked up her phone one last time. Scrolling past the military brass and political operatives, she opened a new message. 2. Officer Justin Klein. You did the right thing. Stay steady. You're not alone. Send. Then she set the phone down, leaned back, and for the first time in days, let the darkness feel like peace. Tomorrow, she would march into City Hall not as a survivor, not as a victim, but as the architect of a reckoning. And they would learn, as every enemy she'd faced had learned before. You don't corner a SEAL. Not without consequences. At precisely 7:45 a.m., the war room inside the Naval Criminal Investigative Service's downtown field office came alive. Rows of monitors blinked to life, faces from every major oversight committee and civilian review board joining the secure video link. Agent Clarice Benton stood at the head of the room, eyes scanning the compiled dossiers spread across the long oak table. Dana Moore entered with the same steady, unhurried gait she'd used walking into ambush zones on foreign soil. She wore her service khakis again, not for show, but because every brass insignia on her chest would mean something today. She wasn't here to ask. She was here to reveal. Benton gestured her toward a seat beside Commander Russell, who had already set out a thick, unsealed envelope marked Confidential Internal Affairs. You ready for this? Benton asked without looking up. Dana smirked. Been ready since the moment Daniels laid hands on me. The first document projected onto the screen was a precinct internal incident report from 3 years prior. A 19-year-old black man named Malik Denton had been arrested on assault charges after allegedly attacking Officer Daniels during a traffic stop. No dashcam footage was entered into evidence. No body cam logs. Witness statements from bystanders were discarded. He'd pled guilty after months in lockup. His public defender, overwhelmed, advised him to take the deal. That case, Benton began, her voice sharp and clear, was one of 27 nearly identical instances. Same officer, same fabricated narrative, almost exclusively black or Latino suspects. Evidence repeatedly missing. Body cams suspiciously disabled. Screens filled with names, dates, mugshots, lives derailed by one officer's badge and a department that buried the damage. Dana's gaze hardened. How deep does it go? Benton didn't hesitate. At least 4 officers directly complicit, a dozen more who turned a blind eye, and 2 captains who cleared the reports. Internal Affairs head, Daniel's brother-in-law, he's gone, resigned at 5 a.m. Russell gave a humorless chuckle. Guess the rats are jumping early. But Benton wasn't finished. We also traced Daniels's financial transactions. She was profiting off the seizures in these arrests. Civil forfeiture payouts funneled through third-party legal expense funds. Classic laundering tactic. And here's the kicker. 4 judges approving every warrant she requested without oversight. Dana let the weight of it settle. This wasn't a bad cop. It was a system, and it had been eating people alive for years. What about the DA's office? Dana asked, already knowing the answer. Benton gestured to another screen where a weary-looking assistant district attorney appeared via video link. Amelia Cross, mid-40s, salt and pepper hair pulled into a strict bun, and the look of a woman carrying secrets heavy enough to crack bone. I've been trying to blow the whistle for over a year, Cross said, her voice dry, grief barely hidden. Every time I flagged a Daniels case, my supervisors buried it. The mayor's office didn't want the scandal. Career cops handling the streets was the official line. ICE didn't have the reach to stop it. Until now. Dana leaned forward, eyes locking onto the screen. You've got it now. The next move was a surgical strike. By 10:30 a.m., subpoenas were issued for Daniels and 3 other officers. Judge Patrick Willoughby, one of the 4 flagged as complicit, was placed on immediate suspension, pending judicial review. Civil rights attorneys gathered outside the courthouse as news of the investigation leaked, reporters scrambling to understand how a decorated SEAL became the catalyst for a scandal buried for years. At 11:05 a.m. sharp, the doors of the precinct swung open as Internal Affairs officers entered, accompanied by federal agents. Daniels sat frozen at her desk when they came for her. Gone was the smirk, the bravado. In its place was the wide-eyed panic of a predator caught in her own snare. Officer Catherine Daniels, the lead investigator announced, reading from the warrant. You are under arrest for falsifying police reports, perjury, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and criminal conspiracy to defraud. The squad room fell silent as the cuffs closed around her wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited, though the whole department was anything but. As she was escorted out, Daniel's gaze met Dana's through the crowd of agents and press, and for the first time, the predator flinched. Dana didn't smile, didn't need to. The message was delivered. By noon, City Hall was in a full-blown crisis. The mayor's office released a generic statement about zero tolerance for misconduct, while privately scrambling to shield itself from fallout. Phone lines lit up with calls from community leaders, national advocacy groups, and federal oversight committees demanding accountability. Dana's demands were already on the table. Independent civilian oversight of the police department, with subpoena authority. Body cam audit mandates with third-party management. Elimination of qualified immunity for officers with sustained misconduct complaints. Reopening of all Daniels-linked cases. Reparative compensation for victims wrongfully convicted under her false statements. And this time, no one in power was foolish enough to refuse. The storm was far from over. The lawsuits would drag on for months. Politicians would scramble to rewrite narratives. Police unions would posture. But the foundation had cracked, and Dana Moore had made sure everyone knew whose hands held the sledgehammer. As night fell again over the city, Dana returned to her apartment. She didn't celebrate, didn't post statements. She sat with her service ribbons, tracing the rows with a thumb calloused from years of weapons training and field dressings. Another war fought. Another war ahead. But this one mattered in a way no battlefield ever had, because this was home. And she wasn't done yet. The next morning, the precinct cafeteria was unusually quiet. No one dared claim the corner table where Officer Catherine Daniels used to hold court, her smug laughter and venomous gossip infecting the room like a virus. Now it sat empty, a ghost of bad power. Officers passed it by without glancing at the vacant chair. Dana Moore stood in the hallway outside the squad room, watching through the two-way glass. She wasn't in uniform today. Plain clothes, no rank insignia, her natural curls pulled back tight, face calm. To anyone who didn't know better, she was another investigator, another federal suit. But inside that room, something had changed. The Brotherhood was cracking. A cluster of officers sat huddled at one table, heads bent low in anxious conversation. Others kept to themselves, shooting nervous glances at the empty walls where photos of commendation ceremonies once hung. Several had been removed overnight. Daniels was gone. The captain who'd signed off on her reports placed on administrative leave. 3 of the 4 complicit officers arrested. And now, the cleanup. Agent Clarice Benton stepped beside Dana, coffee in hand. "Notice it?" she murmured. Dana gave a tight nod. "They're afraid." "Good," Benton said coldly. "Means the chain's broken." Inside the squad room, Officer Justin Klein sat alone at the far end of the room. Few of his former buddies had tried to talk to him earlier. Light jabs, the old, "you made your bed, brother" routine. But none of them stuck around. Not when the word spread that Klein was working with federal investigators. Not when the subpoenas started hitting mailboxes at dawn. Now, eyes avoided him. It was a brutal kind of exile. Dana knew that loneliness. She'd seen it in war zones when soldiers crossed the line of loyalty to report abuse. When you dared to act with integrity in a system addicted to silence. "You think he's safe?" Dana asked. Benton sipped her coffee. "Safer than he was yesterday." A cluster of senior officers emerged from a closed-door meeting. Lieutenant Avery Grant, Daniel's longtime drinking buddy, crossed the cafeteria with forced nonchalance. His eyes landed on Klein. The stare lingered a second too long. Dana's hand twitched at her side. She stepped forward, intercepting his path. "Lieutenant Grant," she said, voice low, calm. He stopped short, his surprise quickly masked by bravado. "You've got no business here." "Funny," Dana said softly, leaning in. "I outrank half the room and the other half's about to answer for protecting Daniel's garbage for years. So, technically, this is my business." Grant's smirk wavered. Look, I don't know what you think you're gonna prove. It's not about proving, Dana cut him off. It's about rebuilding. You've got a choice to make, Grant. Hold the line for the old guard and go down with them. Or start talking. Grant sneered, but Dana saw the flicker in his eyes. The doubt, the calculation. He knew. The war was over. I've got nothing to say, Grant muttered, brushing past. Dana didn't stop him. No need. Benton had already frozen his accounts, pulled his call logs, his emails. The investigation wouldn't need a confession. What mattered now was the message. By noon, word of Grant's attempted intimidation had made its way to command. Another inquiry, another review board, another badge at risk. Across the city, the ripple effects spread. The mayor's office, once dismissive, issued a formal apology to the families whose loved ones had been wrongfully convicted on Daniels' falsified charges. The DA's office fast-tracked motions to vacate convictions, while civil rights attorneys prepared lawsuits. The public was watching now. And the cops knew it. Some of them, the younger ones, the ones too new to be fully indoctrinated, started reaching out to NCIS and the Civilian Oversight Board. Quiet tips, sealed statements. One by one, the silence cracked. Dana and Benton compiled them methodically. Abuse cover-ups, evidence tampering, ghost overtime logs, old complaints that had vanished. An entire culture built on the confidence that no one would ever hold them accountable. And for years, no one had. Until a simple traffic stop on a humid August night, and the miscalculation of a cop who thought she was invincible. As dusk painted the sky in streaks of orange and violet, Dana stood once more outside the precinct, watching as Officer Klein left through the side entrance. He kept his head down, hands in his pockets. No one spoke to him. He passed Dana without stopping, but their eyes met for a brief second. And in that look, not a greeting, not thanks, but an understanding. Survival wasn't about being untouchable. It was about knowing when to stop standing alone. Tomorrow, another officer would call. The next day, 2 more. A week from now, a dozen. And the brotherhood would unravel by its own hands. Dana smiled to herself, turned away and disappeared into the city. The war wasn't won, but the tide had turned. And nothing, not the brass, not the unions, not the dirty judges, would hold back what was coming next. 2 days later, the tactical room inside the NCIS field office was humming with movement. A different kind of operation was unfolding here. Not one with rifles and extraction plans, but one built on data trails, paper records, sworn statements, and the relentless crawl of federal subpoenas. It was a war fought in silence where the deadliest weapons were facts no one could deny. Dana Moore stood before a sprawling evidence board. Dozens of mugshots, legal documents, property forfeiture records, and arrest logs crisscrossed with red thread. In the center, Catherine Daniels' booking photo stared out from a manila file, her expression defiant, even as her world collapsed. "Patterns complete," Agent Clarice Benton said, stepping up beside Dana and handing her a tablet. "That's every wrongful arrest, every falsified report, every missing body cam file linked to Daniels over 6 years. Plus new testimony from 3 officers this morning. Names we didn't even have yesterday." Dana scrolled through the statements. The same tactics, over and over. Predatory stops, false charges, threats in holding cells, forced confessions from public defenders too overworked and jaded to fight. And it hadn't stopped with Daniels. The new names on the board made Dana's stomach knot. Lilteen Avery Grant, Officer Mona Kale, Sergeant Price, a judge, 2 assistant district attorneys. The infection ran deeper than even Benton had guessed. "Time to cut the head off," Benton said. Dana nodded. "Bring them in." It started that afternoon. 3 federal agents arrested Lilteen Grant outside a steakhouse where he'd been meeting with city officials. They pulled him out in front of half the city's power elite. The sight of Grant, red-faced and sweating as cuffs snapped over his wrists, was broadcast live on 2 local networks. At the same time, Officer Mona Kale was pulled from patrol in broad daylight. Sergeant Price tried to run, a coward's instinct, but made it only 4 blocks before a federal car intercepted him. Each arrest had been carefully timed and placed. No backroom deals, no quiet surrenders. Every takedown visible to a city that had too long believed no badge could fall. By nightfall, the mayor's office issued a hasty statement about ongoing internal reviews and full cooperation with federal authorities. But the truth was clear. The Brotherhood wasn't just cracking, it was shattering. At 7:30 p.m., Dana gathered with Commander Russell and Benton in the operations center. The mood wasn't celebratory. It was too soon for that. The damage was too deep. But the current had shifted. Russell clapped Dana on the shoulder. "Hell of a thing you did, Moore." Dana shook her head. "Not alone." Benton cleared her throat. "There's more. We intercepted communications between Daniels' defense counsel and a private security contractor. Looks like someone's trying to get her out on bail and smuggle her out of state." Russell swore under his breath. "Desperate bastards." Dana's jaw tightened. "Not happening." They laid out the plan. NCIS would oversee Daniels' overnight transfer to a federal holding facility. No gaps, no unsupervised transports. Federal marshals already embedded. The old city guard wouldn't get another shot at covering their tracks. Not this time. And then came the next strike. Dana opened a folder marked OP, Restore Justice. Inside were the sealed files for every wrongful conviction tied to Daniels and her unit. 37 cases in total. Men and women who'd lost years, some over a decade, for crimes that never existed. "Starting tomorrow," Benton said quietly, "we get them out." Dana swallowed hard. "And the reparations?" Russell nodded. "Already in motion. State funds, civil suits, public acknowledgments. We'll burn the old regime to the ground if we have to." At midnight, the final operation of the night began. Dana personally accompanied the transport unit for Daniels. A quiet, windowless van flanked by unmarked federal cars, headlights cutting through the darkened city streets. Daniels sat in the back, hands shackled, eyes puffy from crying. She didn't speak. Not anymore. As they passed through the intersection where she'd first stopped Dana on that humid August night, Dana allowed herself one long, quiet glance. "This is the part where you think it's over," Dana murmured. Daniels blinked, confused. "It's not." At precisely 12:43 a.m., the convoy reached the secure facility. Daniels was processed without incident. No witnesses, no press leaks, no old guard officers tipped off to intervene. By 1 a.m., it was done. The final message went out from NCIS headquarters. Operation completed. All primary targets secured. Secondary sweep underway. Structural audit begins at dawn. In a city that once thrived on silence, the noise of justice had begun to roar. As Dana stepped outside into the crisp night air, her phone buzzed. A message from Klein. "5 more called me today. Said they're done covering for the old guard. They'll testify. I told them you'd protect them." "Hope that's true." Dana typed back. "I keep my promises. War's not done yet. But you're on the right side now." She looked out over the city. Tomorrow there'd be a reckoning, and this time it wouldn't stop at the station. By the time the sun rose over the city, word of the night's takedowns had rippled far beyond the local precinct walls. National news networks picked up the story before the morning traffic report. Terms like systemic corruption, wrongful convictions, and abuse of authority crawled across the bottom of television screens. The faces of disgraced officers, judges, and prosecutors rotated in a relentless cycle of exposure. Dana Moore didn't sleep that night. She didn't need to. She stood in the control room of the NCIS field office watching the feeds. One screen showed the courthouse steps, where reporters crowded barricades in anticipation of a major federal announcement. Another displayed the names of released inmates, one by one as paperwork processed and doors opened. Malik Denton, the 19-year-old arrested years earlier under Daniels' fabricated report, stepped into the dawn light for the first time in 5 years. His mother's arms swallowed him before any camera could reach him. By 9 a.m., the U.S. attorney for the district, a black woman named Evelyn Royce, took the podium outside the courthouse. The crowd went quiet as she spoke. Today, we announce the largest coordinated federal investigation into municipal law enforcement corruption in the state's history. What began as a traffic stop escalated into a criminal conspiracy that cost innocent people their freedom, their safety, and their futures. That ends now. Dana watched Royce's face on the monitor, a fire in her words that didn't need teleprompters or handlers. This was real, lived, the kind of fury that wasn't manufactured for TV. Behind Royce, a new banner hung. Justice is non-negotiable. Across the city, precinct walls filled with whispers. Officers who'd once walked tall in Daniel's shadow now fidgeted with sudden self-awareness. The brotherhood had cracked, and those still clinging to the old ways felt the walls closing in. Dana knew the next wave would be trickier. The city's power brokers, the ones without badges but with signatures on the backdoor deals, were already making calls to salvage their reputations. Corporate sponsors, business leaders, even a few city council members Dana had never heard of, began issuing pre-written statements of support for police accountability, hoping to outrun the storm. But this storm had been building for too long, and Dana wasn't interested in apologies made for cameras. At 10:30 a.m. sharp, a private meeting convened inside City Hall. Dana, Agent Benton, Commander Russell, Evelyn Royce, and a dozen leaders from community activist groups gathered around a heavy oak table. The room hummed with tension and the faint scent of burnt coffee. Mayor Jacob Hill sat stiffly at the head, face drawn and pale. The smug confidence he'd worn just a week earlier was gone, replaced by something rawer: fear. Dana spoke first, voice even and quiet. "We aren't here for symbolic reforms." A few officials shifted in their seats. "You've ignored this for years," Dana continued. "Buried complaints, smeared victims, protected predators in uniform. That changes today." She slid a stack of documents across the table, drafted federal mandates and policy reforms prepared by Benton and Royce's teams. The list was exhaustive: independent civilian oversight commission with full subpoena and termination authority, mandatory third-party auditing of all body cam and evidence room logs, state-level elimination of qualified immunity for officers with sustained misconduct complaints, reopening of 83 closed internal affairs investigations dating back 5 years, immediate reparative compensation program for exonerated victims. Mayor Hill cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Commander Moore." "Dana," she corrected sharply. "I'm not here on military orders. I'm here as a citizen who watched this city let predators hunt my people in plain sight." The mayor's gaze flickered toward Royce, who folded her arms. "You'll either sign these, or we'll bring this city to its knees in federal court," Royce said flatly. "And trust me, Mr. Mayor, you'll lose." A heavy silence settled. Then, with a faint tremor in his hand, Hill reached for the pen. He signed. By noon, the news broke. The reforms were public, the agreements binding. The arrests still rolling in, and the streets erupted, not in riots, not in violence, but in an unprecedented march. Thousands gathered, a mix of mothers and fathers, veterans and students, former convicts and lawyers, holding signs bearing names once buried under falsified charges. A surge of bodies moved through downtown, a tide of unity the city hadn't seen in decades. Dana stood at the edge of it all, leaning against a street lamp, watching them pass. She didn't march. She didn't wave a flag. She let them have this moment because it wasn't hers. It was theirs. A teenage girl held a sign reading, "They don't own us anymore." A middle-aged black man's read, "My son deserved better." An old woman, tears streaking her face, simply raised a photo of her grandson. Agent Benton appeared beside Dana. "You did this?" Dana shook her head. "No, I just cleared the field. They're the ones rebuilding it." And she meant it. The war wasn't over. It never truly would be. Systems like these didn't crumble in a week, but now, for the first time in far too long, The people standing beneath those courthouse steps weren't begging for justice. They were taking it. The courthouse steps were slick with rain by the time the last of the crowd dispersed that evening. But the city wasn't retreating to its old, silent habits. Conversations lingered in alleys and barbershops, in community centers and church basements, words traveling faster than patrol cars ever could. The storm wasn't just weather now. It was cultural. The curtain had been pulled back, and no one was pretending anymore. In the makeshift war room at NCIS headquarters, Dana Moore stood in front of a massive digital board, live updates feeding in from every corner of the city. 27 officers suspended, 16 arrests pending, 4 resignations, and then the biggest one, Police Chief Anthony Vega placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending federal investigation. It was the one piece Dana had been waiting for. Vega had been Daniel's shield for years, the architect of backroom deals, the man who reassigned whistleblowers to desk duty and fast-tracked officers like Daniels into positions of unchecked power. The face of performative police reform in every election season, while privately signing off on the numbers game that rewarded cops for volume over justice. And now, his fall wasn't whispered. It was live-streamed. At precisely 6 p.m., federal marshals walked into Vega's office while local news cameras camped out on the street below. The sight of a police chief, still in uniform, his badge gleaming against his chest as he was escorted out, did more for public confidence than any press release the city had issued in years. Commander Russell was already watching the feed when Dana entered the room. "It's done," he said quietly. Dana crossed her arms. "Not yet." She pointed to the names still on the board. City council members, deputy commissioners, private prison contractors tied to asset seizures. There were still rot roots to pull, but for now the head of the badge had fallen. Officer Catherine Daniels sat in a high-security holding cell with no bail, facing a staggering list of charges that grew by the hour as new evidence surfaced. By day's end, a deal would be offered, not for her freedom but for her cooperation. The state wanted names, and Daniels, stripped of power and abandoned by the very system she'd served, was about to become the prosecution's star witness. Agent Clarice Benton placed a thick dossier on the table beside Dana. "She's already talking," Benton said, smirking faintly. "Gave up half her department by lunchtime." Dana stared at the list of names. Some she knew, most she didn't, but every one of them had at some point made the quiet decision to choose self-interest over justice. Some with cruelty, some with cowardice. "I want immunity off the table," Dana said, her voice flat. Russell glanced up. "She'll never walk free again. Not under our watch." Benton nodded. "Not a chance. She's a symbol now, and symbols matter." By nightfall, public trust, fractured and bleeding, began stitching itself back together in small, defiant ways. At community centers, legal aid groups extended free consultations to anyone impacted by Daniels' cases. Civil rights organizations organized clinics for victims of wrongful arrests. A group of black and brown high school students spray-painted a mural downtown. "We remember, we rise." And Dana Moore? She returned to the place it started, the intersection where Daniel's flashing lights had stopped her that August night. The rain was steady, coating the street in reflective puddles. Dana stood in silence for a long moment, the hum of traffic a distant pulse behind her. She crouched near the curb, brushing her fingers over the faint scrape marks left by years of squad car tires. There was no ceremony, no cameras, just a quiet acknowledgement. She wasn't naive enough to think the war was over. Systems like this didn't die in a day, and even when toppled, they rebuilt in the shadows, waiting for the world to look away. But tonight, one predator was caged, one machine was dismantled, and one city had remembered how to raise its voice. She heard footsteps behind her. Klein. The young officer stood awkwardly, hands in his jacket pockets, face pale and hollow-eyed from the chaos of the last week. But there was something else there, too. Defiance. Guilt. The first fragile steps of atonement. They promoted me," he mumbled. Dana arched a brow. Should have expected it. They'll need a face to rebuild around. He gave a weak, humorless laugh. I don't deserve it. No, Dana agreed. But maybe you'll earn it. Klein swallowed hard. I'll try. Good, she said, starting back toward her car. Because I'll be watching. As she drove away, the city rolled on. Scarred but awake, battered but unbroken. Justice, Dana knew, wasn't clean. It was jagged, it left scars, and it never arrived on time. But it had come, and tomorrow she'd start again. 2 weeks later, the city's skyline glimmered against a clear night sky, its streets still carrying the echoes of what had come undone. The banners were gone, but the conversations remained. Murals painted across crumbling brick walls bore the faces of those exonerated. Windows displayed placards that read, "We believe survivors," and "Defund corruption," in bold, unapologetic letters. Change didn't move like thunder. It seeped into sidewalks and school hallways, into courtroom lobbies and kitchen table arguments. And in that slow, stubborn way, the city was beginning to learn. Dana Moore stood on the balcony of the community center where tonight's vigil was being held. A modest, open-air event, no press, no politicians. Just families, survivors, people who carried names in their throats that they refused to let history bury. Below, flickering candlelight stretched across the parking lot, a constellation of grief and defiance. Malik Denton was there, sitting with his mother, both of them holding a photo of his younger self, before the prison jumpsuit, before Daniels, before the 5 stolen years. Several others stood by him, faces Dana recognized from case files and blurred mugshots. One by one, they took the makeshift stage, not to give speeches, but to reclaim something stolen. "My name's Jalen," one man said, voice rough, "and I was told I was a criminal. I wasn't. I was a father, a mechanic, a man, and I'm still here." A ripple of applause, some tears. A woman named Naya held up the police report from her wrongful arrest. "They erased my name, tried to make me a number, but I kept this. I wanted them to remember what they did." The candles flickered, and the old wounds ached, but no one looked away. And then, someone called out Dana's name. She hadn't planned to speak, hadn't prepared words. But when Malik's mother reached a hand toward her from the front row, she understood it wasn't about speeches. It was about standing in the aftermath and claiming it. Dana stepped up to the small platform, the night air cool against her skin. "I won't talk long," she began, her voice carrying steady over the hush. "Because I don't need to tell you what happened. You lived it. Some of you survived it. Some of you lost people to it." She looked out over the crowd, past the candles, past the heavy grief in their faces. "I was trained to lead soldiers into combat," she continued, "to spot danger, to protect my team. But no one teaches you how to fight the kind of war we've fought these last weeks. The war where the enemy wears a badge, carries a gavel, signs release forms. The kind of war we aren't supposed to survive." A silence fell over them. "And yet here you are," Dana said softly. "Here we are, scarred, yes, wounded, yes, but breathing, speaking, and refusing to be erased." Someone in the crowd raised a fist. Another followed, then another. Dana's throat tightened. "This city owes you more than apologies," she said, voice firmer now. "It owes you rebuilt homes, vacated records, full paychecks for the years you lost, and it owes you its shame for what it let happen." The candles cast long, swaying shadows. The wind shifted. "And if they forget again," Dana promised, "we remind them. If they rebuild the old walls, we tear them down. Because this isn't their city anymore. It's ours." The applause was slow, then gathering like a rising drumbeat. Not frenzied, not performative. Something deeper, something earned. As she stepped down, Malik grabbed her wrist. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "For seeing us." Dana nodded, her voice catching in her throat. "For always. Later that night, as the last of the candles were extinguished and the crowd trickled into the dark streets, Dana sat alone in her car, the engine off, the city's hum soft. The fight wasn't finished. New enemies would rise. New Daniels would crawl from the shadows. But now, she wasn't alone. The people of this city had tasted their own power, had cracked open the walls of corruption and refused to sew them shut. And when the next war came, because it always did, they would meet it together. Dana closed her eyes, the ache in her chest not grief, but a fierce, stubborn hope. Justice was slow, but it came, and so would she. The night reclaimed the streets, but not the silence. What Dana Moore ignited in those tense, blistering days didn't end with a courtroom victory or a scandal's collapse. It lived on in the small, defiant choices people made daily, the refusal to look away, the courage to name the broken parts of a system, the insistence on something better, a city still healing, still learning, but no longer in the dark. For Dana, it wasn't about medals or headlines. It was about the weight lifted from the shoulders of those she'd never meet. The doors cracked open for names history would never record. It was about taking back what was stolen. And in cities like this, where power had gone unchecked for too long, it was a promise made in candlelight and grit. We're not finished. Not now. Not ever.